and then I'm going to have my scripts written by an AI machine, AI learning, who has enough knowledge of the industry to know what people like and what they don't, and the twists and turns that people are going to expect in a given show over the course of 7 seasons or whatever that is. At what point do we as a consumer even care?
Yeah, approach it from a creative writing standpoint.
Absolutely.
What do you think is going to change there?
Well,
let me just say that I've already gotten ads that say I can make money writing a book using ChatGPT.
That's right.
I'm not sure when I'll be able to compete with you. But
I haven't seen those ads yet, but I know they're coming.
Yeah, of course.
And of course they're coming. And I'm a little bit more worried about this than the more I think about it, the more worried I am. And
as a creative writer.
As a creative, yeah. Right? Not so leaving aside the pedagogy, but as creation. We've talked in the past about the one thing that supposedly AI couldn't touch was creativity. Right.
As recent as 3 months ago.
That's right.
That was the big.
That was the deal. But we've seen it disrupt visual art. Right. There's been conversations of that. And in fact, I was doing a little reading before this, and I think it was maybe a couple years ago. It might have even been last year. There was a visual art competition in which it was a digital art competition, right? So this is art that's already being digitally created, right? It's already, the computer is built into the art anyway. And the person who won this contest created this through AI. And he was upfront about this. He did it and he made an argument about it being, he made it part of his process, and it was, he was using AI as part of his artistic process, and so.
So effectively, his tool.
That's right. So that was his argument.
Whatever you call that paint thing was.
Right. This is his argument.
Okay.
And of course, that wasn't the community did not accept that argument, right? But it does create this this question, and that is, first of all, in visual art or writing or whatever art form it is, the question first is, where does the AI learn to write? Because it's getting its knowledge base from real artistic work that was really presented and created by real life human beings. Right. So in some sense, we're worried about plagiarism on the back end. Well, guess who's plagiarizing the work on the front end?
Yeah.
And that is the AI programming is learning by taking in an amalgam of work and then producing the work itself. Here's something that I was thinking about concerning artistic creation, and if you want to just follow me down the rabbit hole a little bit here.
Absolutely.
So, do you know a writer by the name of Robert Galbraith? Do you know this name?
I'm going to say no.
You're going to say no, but I bet once I say this, your memory might be jogged a little bit. So people who are watching this will have heard of this story. But Robert Galbraith is a crime writer, British crime writer, who first published a book called The Cuckoo's Calling in 2013. So 10 years ago. So keep that in mind that this was 10 years ago.
Okay.
And the novel was released to, I don't know, I would say not, it had some good reviews. It wasn't poorly written. It was a good book. Reviewers said it was good. Sold, some copies, but nothing out of the ordinary, nothing to make a big splash, nothing to let you know this was going to be anything that important. Until some researchers got tipped off, and they started using a process called linguistic forensics, right? So basically this process that says, through computer learning, we can tell that a piece of writing, a piece of creative writing, has a specific hidden thumbprint. Like all writers, they have their own fingerprint, and what I mean by that is they have their own developed and learned syntax.
You would know a Stephen King novel.
That's exactly right. So you pick up a Stephen King novel, and if nobody tells you it's a Stephen King novel, if you've read enough of them, you know.
Yeah.
And you know because of the syntax and the diction and the character tropes and the recurring motifs, and you just know who that writer is. Well, after some computer intervention and these linguistic forensics, it turns out that Robert Galbraith writes a whole lot like J.K. Rowling. Really? And in fact, it was J.K. Rowling who wrote under this pen name, and she didn't want, at least this is the story, that she didn't want anybody to know. Because listen, she's already rich enough for the Harry Potter series, of course.
Let's try something else.
She wants to try something else, and money doesn't really matter, so it doesn't matter if she sells a whole lot. She wants this new venture that's not tainted by her name, that people are going to go buy the book because she wrote it.
And go, right? Well, that's not a Harry Potter
That's
novel.
Right, that's right. Yeah. So eventually, whether she released it or a publicist released it, I mean, that this was her.
Now that you're saying it, I sort of remember something.
Yeah. So this was
big
in the news, and so what I find interesting about this, if we trace this and we tie it back to what we're talking about today, if we learn anything from that, and we learn that a writer has a hidden fingerprint, that they have their own syntax and diction, even if they're not aware of it, and that a computer program 10 years ago could with some certainty say that yes, these two writers are the same. So if now we have an AI learning tool that can be fed enough of a database sample that says, okay, these are novels by this person. Take somebody with a huge, a James Patterson, for instance, for people who are familiar with commercial fiction, or Colleen Hoover or Stephen King, right? Stephen King's written like 65 books, right?
Wow.
So the AI learns from this. It learns the patterns of Stephen King's writing.
He's one short of the Bible, I think.
Yeah, right. Little, yeah. So he's almost there. He's still kicking. So the AI learns to write like Stephen King, and now you have the opportunity to have a new Stephen King book that is not authored by Stephen King. That is the kind of thing that gives me great pause and great concern. One of the things in creative work, but the fact that when Stephen King passes, at whatever time that is, if there's enough interest in continuing on, not just horror in the vein of Stephen King, but some sort of replication,
an amalgamation
of, that's right, that can do this. And a lot. When I say this, it might seem a little far-fetched. We might, Stephen King writing from the dead.
Right.
But I don't think we're that far away from that. And in fact, there was a writer a couple of years ago, and his name is escaping me now. He wrote a book called The Revelations. I'm not sure. I mean, he's like a neuroscientist, but he's also a fiction writer. And he got access to GPT-3 before it was before it was ChatGPT, before it became sort of public facing. I wouldn't have had any idea what he was even talking about.
Right.
And he decided to take this programming and to feed it. He had already written a novel, right? It was going to be published, and he fed the chat programming the dust jacket, the book jacket copy, right? The teasers that are in the books or whatever. So he fed it that copy. And then he also gave it a few passages from the book. And he basically said, finish this scene.
Uh-oh.
And it did. And it was pretty convincing. And there were some things in it that didn't make sense. Was
it similar or just a
really
different
similar? Vein? So very, very similar. In fact, what was the most remarkable thing, and I don't want to overstate this because I haven't done enough reading from this particular person, but what I understand him to say is that some of the passages that the AI learning wrote were so close to things that came later in his novel, independently, things that it had no idea that he wrote because it wasn't fed it. It couldn't know it. That it was even
enough. Setting and character development.
That's right.
Seems like.
That's right. So if it learns enough about what the goals of the book are, and listen, this was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
How much more has it learned since then? And it was enough to where this particular writer, having that experience and knowing his own work intimately, was alarmed. And if that's the case, I think that in the coming years we're going to get a lot of people in creative fields, I think primarily in fiction terms, who are going to be really concerned about this.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to ask you about the creative field, but as you were talking, I remember something I saw maybe yesterday, and using ChatGPT as an intersection between different authors and styles. So,
Sure.
And I can't remember exactly, but it was write 10 commandments. Let's say write an 11th commandment in the style of Confucius.
Sure.
With reasoning of why it should be, like
Sure.
what it. And the person that put this in said, "We need an 11th commandment." Now I don't remember what it was.
Right.
It was, it was something like, "Don't use ChatGPT."
Yeah, right.
But they were, and then they did some other tests about, and just mixing philosophy, sort of philosophical views with writing style. So I think it was like use a King James version to. And there
it is.
And their thing, I guess the end thought was, hold on to your hats.
That's right.
Like we have no idea how powerful, and it's smarter than us.
Yes. And so what I find interesting about the creation of something new out of that out of these pieces that have come before, right? At their core, again, as a fiction writer, earlier in this conversation, I talked about how important it was to engage an audience, to have a readership that people really enjoy a particular book. Well, and if there's enough interest in a particular style, or say people are just really interested in mystery novels, for instance. Well, if I'm a publisher and I eventually, over time, I can train my little corner of ChatGPT or whatever the AI learning tool is at that time. Your AI
producer,
right?
Or writer.
That's right. So if I can over time train it the genre conventions and the motifs and the recurring things that happen, because we know that, say, mystery in particular is very tropey. Things happen in mystery after mystery after mystery, and now what the AI is tasked with is filling in the blanks, creating believable characters.
Yeah.
And so what I see that could happen, there's one way, students of speculative fiction will say that speculative fiction speculates about what could happen, and it sometimes gets a little bit of it right, sometimes it doesn't. So let's play speculative fiction here in the future. Is that you could have a powerhouse publisher company who invests a lot of money in this sort of thing, and then they have people, I don't know, call them technicians on the back end, who take what the AI programming produces, and they say, well, this is good, but this isn't quite right. Do it over. In the same way that an editor would work with,
tweak it.
Yeah, that's right. In the same way an editor would work with an author. But guess what? The editor and author relationship, I'm going through this process right now with my editor. And that process can take months and months, sometimes years in rare cases. It doesn't take that long.
Because you have a day job.
Because I'm a human.
Yeah.
And because she's a human. And when we talk, we disagree about things. Well, AI is not going to disagree with you, editor. AI is going to say, try its hardest to please you.
Yeah.
And then it's either going to or it's not. And then somebody on the back end of that can say this works or it doesn't. This needs to change or it doesn't. And you can have a book in a matter of, hours, days? We don't know.
Yeah, and I just think about screenwriting.
Oh yes.
About
yes.
A TV series that we would not necessarily know, and especially if you take the best of.
Yes.
I mean, how many good? I don't know why. Something like CSI or something comes to mind, but you could take the best of. There's been how many
iterations over and over?
Yeah.
Yes.
And you could create a whole new series and change the set. I mean,
that's right.
I hadn't even thought about.
Yes. So so you mentioned screenwriting. So I do screenwriting. I teach screenwriting. I'm very interested in the discipline, secondarily to fiction. And I actually think it has this may have wider reaching implications for screenwriting than it even does fiction. And the reason for that is in fiction circles, we tend to gravitate towards authors that we know and we trust, and that we've read a book by them, and we seek out the next book by that particular author.
Yeah.
I'm not sure on a large publicly sort of mass consumption of TV that we do that. For instance, you may be able to name directors, right? A handful of directors. But for the most part, if I were to ask you who wrote a lot of blockbuster current films, or who's in the writing room for a particular TV series, you're probably not going to know that, right? So if I'm a TV production company, for instance, and I can whittle my writing room down from X number of writers who the public isn't going to know about anyway, and I get, I don't know, one writer who's going to tweak it with a producer, and then I'm going to have my scripts written by an AI machine, AI learning, who has enough knowledge of the industry to know what people like and what they don't, and the twists and turns that people are going to expect in a given show over the course of 7 seasons or whatever that is. At what point do we as a consumer even care?
Yeah.
Aren't you entertained?
Yeah,
consumer,
and at some point
right?
I'm going, well, it could be interesting. I'd like to see what they come up with, right?
Except for people who want to work in that industry. Right. And then it's a scary thing. It's a really scary thing. And some people may say, no, will never happen because it's human creativity who produces things that humans want to see. And I think right now, I think that's true. Yeah. I don't think we've crossed that threshold yet.
What do you think? It came to mind comedy. I mean, they write their jokes. I mean, that's a form of writing and performance. And it just occurred to me, it wouldn't take much to get some really good jokes. Now I want to go play. That's my
play
next
with the ChatGPT. Maybe it's a jokester.
Give me a safe joke that I could tell my mom about.
Yeah, right. I don't. Again, you probably wouldn't get anything that's great right now. But I really don't think we're in a world that's too far off from things that are again. How many years are we going to be away from the computers doing it all? I don't know.
Yeah.
But just like everything, when we take advancements in technology, in every job that has huge advancements in technology, typically we see the workforce of that job shrink as the technology increases, right? And so I think the same thing could be true in creative industries. And that hurts me to say. These are industries that anybody who's ever tried to work in them already knows they're impossible to get into, right?
Let me ask you this, and you may not put them well, they are creative, but advertising copywriters.
Oh, sure.
Some of the most creative, right? I mean, I love good ads, especially print ads. You know, I love wordplay, and so, they're at risk. I mean,
oh, for sure.
Because as number one, it's about the market, about what sells and what has been successful, and identifying that and contextualizing, internationalizing. You know, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, think about it. If you take an ad, you meant like how to make an ad global and appeal to other cultures even. Right. So you have a room full. A little crossover here. One of my favorite TV shows ever is Mad Men. So this is sort of the advertising crossover. So if you have a room full of copywriters or a few copywriters who are doing the work of advertising, and then they're scheduling meetings with their clients, making sure that that's the sort of the thing that the client wants to in terms of voice and tone, and whether it's funny or it's serious or it's sentimental or whatever. And then they go back and they work on it some more, and then they probably consult with a team that can talk about global sensitivity to other. Well, how much quicker can these AI programming tools? How much quicker could that process be, right? And it's not so it's not just the initial creation of the thing. It's also how malleable we are in the sort of the editing of the product and all of that. So I don't think we're anywhere close in advertising and in screenwriting and fiction writing. I don't think we're close yet to squeezing out the human altogether. But one of the things I just said to you in passing the other day, you know, sort of off camera, was AI can't write a better novel than me now. But in 5 years, I don't know. And I just don't know. If publishers see that there's you know,
economic gain, really,
it's absolutely economic gain.
That's going to be the thing that. Well, it's always.
That's right.
And speaking of economic gains, one of my research areas has been AI and marketing.
Sure.
And one of the things that I came across, a very very recent research, that what this group did is they took what they really were aiming for was how good could we get AI, or how well could we get AI to create a ad for, let's say, social media,
Sure.
based on personalization, based on whatever preferences that the individual has, so demographics, psychographics, socioeconomic, behavior,
Sure.
so all the stuff we have, we could, could we get it to create an advertisement for them? And one of the things that they found was, well, we could give it sort of a template.
Sure.
And finding colors and all of that.
Right.
But one of the things that seemed to be a problem was finding the right thing to say for that person.
Right.
And so if you're selling kayaks or whatever, now with this ability is, okay, here's what we want to say. Mm-hmm. Here's what we want to do. We want to get to their adventure thing.
Right.
They're all about adventure, right? And so, people are interested in kayaks. So now, this sort of solves that problem for them. They could get all the other stuff right within a template format, but now you can actually get that message.
That's right. That's right.
And not only, and especially if it gets good enough to, it knows the buttons to push. So in advertising, it's, the things that push our, but like what makes us tick.
That's right.
And so when we hear something, when something hits all that, it makes it really, talk about persuasion.
Right. Right.
Or manipulation.
Or yes, however you want to paint it. And there again, we're talking about these people that it's not just about writing copy, right? It's about writing the copy, but it's also about the thought process that goes into these things. And in a lot of this, a lot of these companies are driven by all kinds of research that's sort of creepy anyway, because you get all these data from people's lives online, but there's still a human component that says, okay, well, what do we do with this data? And at some point, we're thinking less, and we're letting the AI tell us what to think, which is an area that
No, you've hit on one of the in the industry, and those who are saying, hold on a second, there's a couple of things, and one is that giving up our cognitive abilities.
That's right.
And for one, like decision making. Oh well, AI says I should like that blue striped shirt or check shirt. Right. Because it's going to look good on me.
That's right.
And there's a picture of you with that shirt, right?
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so that part of it, and them knowing so much about us, where does it quit being persuasion and go
manipulation and suggestive? Sometimes we don't know, of course, where we're being manipulated. Very often, the power of suggestion is real. At what point does it become a self-fulfilling thing? If I'm shown this thing that the AI thinks that I want to see, and then I want to see it because I've seen it now, right? I haven't seen the alternative to that thing. Right. Becomes interesting as well. One of the other things that I think about the sort of creative work that worries me about AI in general, or this sort of creative consumption and production, is not just what I was speaking about before in terms of like the new Stephen King novel that's not really written by Stephen King, but it's also on it's sort of to make a bridge between what we were talking about with students and plagiarism and cheating. Let's bridge that to creative work. So this is not frequent, but it's also becoming not infrequent, where you will have a creative writer, a novelist, usually a young person, who for whatever reason has attained a lot of success early, and they have publishers who are clamoring for their first novel, say, or their first major artwork. This happened in 2021, so a couple years ago now, where I won't disclose her name, even though it's publicly available. But this is just a matter of it was not a good situation for this writer. But you could do our little research, a little Googling, and find out exactly who it is and what the situation was. But promising young writer who was paid an obscene advance, something like $250,000 advance to write a novel. And she was under all kinds of pressures to meet this deadline. And so long story short, she plagiarized from different parts, different books out there on the internet, or not on the internet, physical copies and internet, different sources, just enough peppered through her book to where it was very hard to catch. And she fessed up to it eventually. There were something like 30 passages in her book of 300 pages that were plagiarized. And the book was canceled. It created all this problematic area. But now I'm thinking, okay, if she had the technology available to her, and she didn't have to go plagiarize where it could be seen that this passage was taken from this particular book. But now she has the same problem. She's under a deadline. She's got this big advance that she's got to meet. She's got to do this thing. But here's this ChatGPT program, and I'm having problems with this particular scene. I can't get this. It's not the whole thing.
Right.
Most 90% of the novel.
Give me a nudge so I can really get it
That's
going.
right. 85% of the novel is mine, and I feel good about that. But you know what? It's this one scene I just can't. I'm not feeling the language. It just doesn't feel right. So let me play with this until I get it right. And most of that feels like it's completely undetectable. Right now, I don't know how you catch that sort of thing.
Right.
So then it becomes how much, if I did it for 15% of my book, well, maybe it becomes easier to do it for 30% next time, and then 60%. And so now we have a question where we're sort of bridging that sort of integrity from an academic standpoint that we've talked about. Now we're moving that into creativity.
You could still make the case it was my inspiration.
That's right. That's right.
And I just used the tool to sort of fill in some of the blanks.
And okay, so let's follow that sort of logic or chain of thinking. If somebody makes that case, much like the visual artist did, who was completely upfront about it, do we, as a creative industry, eventually come to accept this as an argument that it was my prompting that I was working with the AI? Do we credit the AI as a co-author or whatever that is, right? So I was working with the AI. It was my prompting. I edited the AI afterwards. So do we accept that? Or does it become this sort of clandestine thing where we know that we shouldn't do it, it's an industry no-no, and so you just don't talk about it? It could go both ways, and we could be dealing with both at the same time. And I think that day's coming, which is another thing that makes me nervous about.
I think the idea of the pressure to get things done quickly.
Right.
I can see that as being a really tempting to use something like ChatGPT.
That's right.
Again, I've just been sort of speaking of rabbit holes, right?
Sure, right.
And this, and one of the prompts was, I work for, I don't know if it was Tesla or Twitter, but one of Elon Musk companies, and I need 10 ideas to make something, and I don't, my job, I need 10 ideas and the code to go with it.
Right.
And this thing not only spat out the 10 ideas, but workable code, according to this engineer who did this, and justification.
It's amazing.
For, and so we're just under this time, and this is a problem, and you probably have this with teaching writing. I know I have it with my processes in business technology, and the sort of the feeling that I need to get right to the solution.
Sure. Right.
Discounting a process of analyzing and thinking about and making, taking that time to really get it right.
Right.
they want to jump to the PowerPoint.
That's right.
I'm like, hold on a second.
Right.
Hey, what do you,
That's true.
You know, you haven't even given time to the process of being creative and critical.
Right. Well, and you know, again, I was speaking with a colleague about this, and you know, his sort of response was, maybe this is an institutional concern, not meaning an institution like a specific university, but institutional as in broader than that. We're going to have to decide, and maybe this is going to have to, we've been having this conversation for a while, and maybe we're accelerating now, but are institutions of higher learning becoming basically credentialing enterprises, or do we truly value the knowledge that goes into those credentials? Yeah. And how do we communicate the difference between those two things to a student? Right? If the outcome is the piece of paper, or the outcome is the knowledge, those are two very different things. And one of the things that gives me pause about that a little bit is the old argument that, well, if you don't learn the material, you just get the credential, you cheat your way through the system, well, eventually that's going to bite you because you're going to get in a job and you're not going to know what you're doing. Well, is that true if the job and the employer understands that for instance, the AI writing, the ChatGPT writing, can be part of its own infrastructure, and then in fact it's going to do a better job than most of its hires that come in? Yeah. Is it going to be? You know, and those are the things that, you know, let's tie it back.
Well, we could only do one thing at a time. I could put 5 jobs in the process.
That's right.
And get it done a lot quicker.
That's right. And even if we come back and think about the sort of the creative space and people who are creating, you know, it matters to me a lot because I'm in that space as a participant. Yeah. But if I'm on the outside looking in, if I'm a consumer, if I'm a reader, if I'm a viewer of a television show, do I care? Right? If the content is
your need is to be entertained.
Your need is you are consuming, right? So unless you have a direct sort of insider's perspective, at the end of the day, if the material is still compelling, or if you've at least been told that it's compelling and you bought that, if it's still intellectually stimulating, or at least you think it is because that's where we've gone. Well, does the industry just accept that the consumer will consume, and so this is an opportunity to cut costs and
decrease costs,
that's right,
increase revenue.
And so I think another way that we can think of this is, you know, even now we have in publishing, we have 5 major publishing conglomerates that own most of the publishing houses, right? Yeah. But then you have all these boutique publishers, small presses that do great work, fantastic work. And what if we see in the future that the big boys in publishing, the big publishing houses, are the ones that are really leaning into this because it's a profit machine? But yet you still have boutique agencies, and their whole pitch is, well, we have real human authors that are writing real books that you can, who knows?
But that's, you make a good point there. And for people who appreciate the craft, the art of it, then it does sort of matter. You know, I like to, when we're traveling, me and my fiance, we're out and we go to these, we'd like to find the local art places, you know. And then you hear the story, and maybe sometimes that's their, you know, this is their art, and you talk to them and you get to hear the story, and so that brings something very personal to that. And so maybe it is. It's the computer-generated genre and the human genre. Let's start there.
That's right. And there are people who will continue to care about such things, right? There are. I think that's true. But the longer that we become accustomed to the idea that a computer can write entertainment that we're invested in, there's going to be a segment of the population that really doesn't. That they don't care about that personal sort of touch. Yeah. And so I think it's going to be one of these, that's part of the conversation, right? If you
chain food versus
that's right.
Place that does
or the
really
boutique
well.
thing, or you know, more crudely, you know, this is made with GMOs and this is not, right? You know, some of that is going to be part of that discussion about creative work. Does that squeeze out people who, out of the industry, people who otherwise would have a chance to do the thing they love.
Yeah.
Maybe. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know at this point. I hope not.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be. I want to say interesting, but that word, it will be interesting
In some way, right?
Yeah, it's, and I do think that this is the beginning of touching that almost sacred realm that we were like, no, human creativity.
Sure.
Mimicking is different than mastering.
That's right.
But in some ways, you have to mimic first.
That's right.
And the more human-like now, and so now this is my postulation about this,
Sure.
is the more that we make the machine human-like, the more we're going to become connected with something that doesn't have our emotions, that doesn't have the value. Now, we might be able to program
Right.
in a certain level of value, but sacredness, it's one thing to say the word sacredness, it's another thing to know it and experience and hold
Right.
it up as a value that
That's right.
we look forward to.
Yeah.
Well, on that, let me just ask: what do you think? I mean, you've given a lot of insight to how it is and could affect, but are there any anything left that you want to say about this AI?
Well, I would just say that
Generation.
on your sort of your last point about mimicry versus creation, right? This idea that mimicking a certain style or thing is not the same thing as creating something new. But I would posit that one of the things I've really considered as I've been thinking through the implications of AI on creation in general, creative work, is I think about how I was taught. You asked me how I learned to love writing, or how, sort of go back to that opening question. And I learned to write through reading, the same way that many, I think most writers do. Any good writer is going to be a very strong reader, and they love reading, they're drawn to reading. And the more widely read you are, the more data points you're going to have, right, so to speak, to use the language of AI, to create your own amalgam, your own syntax, your own diction, your own loves of writing. And out of those things, out of learning from different authors you love, you create something new.
Yeah.
Well, the AI can do that on a much larger scale. Now, the human connection is not there. The AI is never going to love Elizabeth Strout or Celestine or Paul Auster, but the AI can certainly learn from them.
Well, and they can mimic the thing that makes you. So I don't know if you've seen Her or Ex Machina.
Yes,
or
absolutely.
Some of they, and I guess this was the part of the issue is just because it responds in a way that we expect, that is emotional, that is deep, doesn't mean it really is.
Right, absolutely, yeah. And when that's sort of the point, though, is it can trick us pretty well. And I think that if it has at its disposal all these different writing styles, then it no longer has to. The example I gave earlier about taking all the Stephen King novels and making something that is distinctly Stephen King. Yeah. Well, if you're taking Stephen King over here, but then you're also taking all these other horror writers, and you're reading broadly, way more broadly than we ever can do as a human. I have a to be read pile beside my bed at home that I would never get through because it just keeps growing. A computer can do that, right? It can take that down, right? So now it's combining all the things it knows about this genre, and truly is it creating something new out of that mimicry? I think so.
And that creating something new, but each one of those has a person. When we're reading and we're almost in conversation with the writer.
Right. Yeah, sure, absolutely.
We're not almost. I mean, there's so many writers that I engage with, and I suppose that can be mimicked. But that's one of the things I value about just the old-fashioned reading.
Right.
And I can get that on some of the internet stuff. But I love having the book in my hand, and I love the process because it slows it down a little bit for me.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess the last thing I would say on that point is. We do create relationships, I think, with between myself as a reader and the writers that I love to consume. And I think there is such a thing as a writer-reader contract. Once the writer has produced the book and it's out in the world, well, that becomes sort of part of that public discourse. And I've got writers who have read everything they've ever written, and if they read it or they write another book, I'm going to read it. A Kentucky writer, Silas House, love Silas House. Anything Silas House writes, you better believe I'm going to read. In the future, if it's not just the AI wrote this book, but it's a specific, bot that we become familiar with, could we have that kind of relationship with a particular writer that is an AI creation? I don't know. My impulse is no, right? But
we're mediated through the page.
That's right.
That's
right.
Wow.
So.
Well, thank you so much.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of Help Me Understand with Dr. Thomas Jeffrey. Make sure to click the subscribe button below and share and like this to help get the word out. Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Appreciate
Yeah.
it. Love to have you back at some point.
Appreciate it. That was fun.